Warning. The story you are about to read and or listen to has a series of potentially triggering and controversial topics, as well as events taking place. I will list them now. Child abuse, substance abuse, implied sexual abuse, bullying, self-harm, suicidal thoughts and tendencies, and potentially more as the story progresses. If you may feel uncomfortable by these things, no one will judge you if you click off of this video. If you accept the risk and want to experience the story for what it is, then I invite you to enjoy this chapter of whitemailing. Thank you. Final disclaimer. I do not make light of these topics, nor do I find them to be tools for shock value. I do consider them very real events that happen daily. Therefore, they should not be barred from being in a story to give it a more real feeling. I do not hope to make light of these things, only to draw attention to them. Please enjoy the show.
Chapter 6. "Why didn't you tell me you had a dog?" asked Kyler, pulling on a thick piece of rope, while a young Jack Russell Terrier growling playfully and yanking on the other end. June looked back, one of her hands on a skillet, the other on a spatula.
"I don't know. You never asked." June smiled sweetly. "Why? Do you like dogs?"
Kyler's eyes were locked on the pup. "You say that like people exist who don't like dogs." June snorted and turned around, facing her stove. It was Saturday, roughly a week after the pool incident. Unfortunately for Kyler, though, that day knocked up a few days on his time. He acted out pretty much every day after that, and he was back up to 29 days. It would soon be a month since the whitemailing of Kyler had begun, and June felt as though he wasn't learning anything. It made no difference to her. Kyler needed two things. Firstly, to improve as a person, and secondly, to have friends. As long as he never did the former, he'd be forced to keep the latter. She knew Kyler got annoyed by her presence, but at least he handled it well enough.
"Did you take notes in class?"
she inquired as she flipped a pancake.
"I'm pretty sure it caught you sleeping."
"Science says if you hear something in your sleep, you remember it better."
"Is that right?"
June asked. "No," Kyler replied honestly. "But it sounds smart enough to trick someone dumb."
"Didn't trick me whatsoever."
"Must be an off day." June rolled her eyes and put a pancake on a plate. It didn't look perfect, but it looked edible to say the least. She quickly spread butter on it and carefully poured syrup on the top. She watched in delight as the syrup slid down the sides of the pancake. She turned around and jumped, seeing Kyler standing there. Kyler stared at the plate hungrily. June sighed.
"I need to put a bell around your neck."
Kyler ignored her. "Is that my plate?" he asked.
"I guess it is now,"
she said reluctantly. She handed him the plate, then turned around to get the second pancake. She did her sacred, buttery, syrupy ritual, then sat down on the couch. She picked up a fork and cut out a slice. Just as she was about to eat, the door opened behind her. She sighed, hearing Jeff's small feet enter the apartment.
"Looks like I'm making one more,"
she said to Kyler. Kyler shrugged, fork in his mouth. "You hungry, Jeff?" she asked. She turned around to see Jeff taking off his coat, hiding his face.
"What is it?"
she inquired. Jeff waved her off.
"It's nothing. I'm not hungry, really." "Don't give me that," she demanded. "What's wrong?"
She grabbed Jeff's face and turned it toward her. She gasped, seeing his face covered in bruises, dried blood stuck to his lip and chin.
"I'm fine,"
he said desperately.
"What happened to you?"
she asked, panicked. Kyler looked back, putting his plate down. "What's the matter?"
"It's nothing,"
Jeff said, trying to defuse the situation.
"It's not nothing,"
June corrected. She looked at Kyler.
"Look at this. He's completely banged up."
Kyler rose to his feet and walked over. He knelt down and looked at Jeff's face, inspecting the marks. "Who did this to you? Don't lie and say you fell. I know what getting hit looks like." June felt sad for a moment, but she had to stay strong. Her remorse and empathy for Kyler wouldn't help her brother. She had to find out who hurt him, and how she could put a stop to it. Jeff shrugged.
"I don't know,"
he mumbled under his breath. "You don't know?" Kyler asked. "So a ninja did this to you?"
"It's not a big deal."
"If it wasn't a big deal, you wouldn't have blood and bruises all over your face. Who did this?" Jeff sighed in exasperation. He tapped his foot, trying to find the words.
Just this kid at the park. It's all in good fun, really.
June choked.
Good fun, she echoed. You look like you got hit by a car, Jeff. This isn't my definition of fun.
When did this happen? Kyler asked. Where did this happen?
Like I said, just at the park a few minutes away, and like an hour ago, I guess. Are they still there?
June demanded. Probably.
June looked at Kyler, who nodded. She turned back to Jeff. Let's go. We're going to have a talk with him. Oh, come on, he begged. I'll die of embarrassment. Not up for discussion, June said with authority. Come on, show us there.
Jeff groaned and kicked the wall. He walked back out the door, and they followed. Unbelievable, Kyler muttered to June, Jeff a few yards in front of them.
I know, right? Who would want to pick on him?
Not that, Kyler corrected. I didn't get to finish my pancake. June turned to him and popped him on the shoulder.
I didn't even get to take a bite of mine.
Kyler put his hand on June's shoulder gently. I'm sorry, he said empathetically, as if her mother had died. June grabbed his hand and dropped it off her shoulder. It didn't take long for them to get to the park. They stopped walking as Jeff surveyed the area, but he didn't look excited to see anyone.
Looks like they left. Oh well, let's go,
he said quickly. He tried to walk away, but Kyler blocked his path. Yeah, let's try to check again, he said. Jeff looked around again and then sighed. He pointed over off to the right at someone by a tree.
There,
he groaned, obviously defeated. Kyler and June walked over to them, June holding Jeff's hand. The person under the tree was a girl around Jeff's age. She had straight red hair and freckles all over. She had a pretty pale green dress on.
Excuse me, June inquired sweetly. Can you help us?
The girl looked up, smiling.
I can't talk to strangers.
She glanced down to see Jeff, and her expression darkened.
You told on me?
She gasped aggressively. Jeff shook his head.
They made me. I didn't mean to. You're dead meat,
she growled. She rose up and tried to hit him, but Kyler put his hand on her head. She kicked and slapped at Kyler, but any hits she landed didn't seem to have any effect. Easy, Tiger, he said dryly. What's your deal? You been picking on him? She ripped his hand away, backing up.
What's it to you?
He's a good kid, Kyler replied. That's what it is to me. Bullying is messed up. Just leave him alone.
It's not bullying, she said in a matter-of-fact tone. I'm having some fun with him. He doesn't seem to be having fun, June said sadly. Do you think you could at least apologize? Why should I? She demanded. It's not my fault he can't take a joke. You should just get over it. Not all jokes are funny, June said sternly. And he doesn't like it, so just leave him alone. Or what? She said, grinning. You can't do anything to me. I'm just a kid.
Kyler, as if prompted, smacked her on top of the head. She yelped in surprise and pain.
What was that?
A dose of reality, Kyler said, squatting down. If you think you can just breeze through life without anyone saying anything in protest, you're crazy. Let this be a lesson. If you bully someone much bigger will come along to bully you right back. Is there a problem here? A voice called out, approaching them. June and Kyler looked at the voice. It was a boy about their age, but taller than Kyler. He was very handsome. He had icy blue eyes and sandy blonde hair that was perfectly brushed back. A simple smile and wink would have most girls weak at the knees. Kyler stood up and nodded. Sure is. Who are you? I'm Eric. I'm her brother. He bent down and patted the girl on the shoulder. He smiled sweetly and pointed behind him. Hannah, go play over there.
Okay,
she moaned softly, rubbing her head. She wandered off without them. So, explain what happened as best you can, he said in a condescending tone in his voice. Kyler ignored him and scoffed. June stepped forward.
Hi, I'm June, and this is Kyler.
She gently led Jeff in front of her by his shoulder.
This is my little brother, Jeff. Apparently your sister has been picking on him for a while. We came to try to put a stop to it.
Eric shrugged. Sorry, he said bluntly. June blinked.
Sorry?
She echoed.
Is that all?
Eric smiled sweetly and approached June.
Listen,
he said softly.
Maybe we can just forget this ever happened, be adults about it. What do you say?
June's brows furrowed. It was obviously he was trying to put on the charm, but June had some otherworldly immunity to charm.
My brother's safety is important to me.
Of course, me too! But kids will be kids, you know? Besides, he's got it tough enough if he's getting picked on by sweethearts like Hannah. That girl wouldn't hurt a fly.
Are you calling my brother a liar?
No! He said defensively. Not at all! Just suggesting he really needs to stop hiding behind the skirt of his sister. Excuse? June started, obviously offended. Kyler stepped in front of her quickly. He got into Eric's face without fear. I guess stupidity and ignorance runs in your family, so I'll just put this into terms you'll understand. Eric's gaze hardened, obviously target locked onto Kyler. If I find out she picks on Jeff, or if you try to insult or harass Juniper, I will rip your legs off and use them as a shovel for your own grave. Eric laughed. Please, you think some white trash punk intimidates me? I suggest you step away from me before you get hurt. Please give me an excuse to hit you. I am begging you. June jumped in front of them quickly, separating them. That's enough! She turned to Kyler, finger in his face. Back off! Kyler's face turned to shock and anger. What? Are you kidding me? I'm defending you and you take his side?
You're out of line.
Out of! He stopped himself and threw his hands into the air in exasperation. Fine, deal with it yourself. Kyler turned around and walked in the direction of the house.
Kyler!
She called. She took a few steps forward. He didn't turn around, he simply continued walking. She sighed in frustration. She quickly turned around, facing Eric.
You're incredibly rude, you know that?
I've been told, Eric said confidently, a smirk across his face. Has anyone told you that you are quite the firecracker? She put her hand up as if holding a stop sign. Don't! She turned to Jeff and motioned him away. Jeff did as she asked and walked away. She turned back to Eric and took a deep breath.
I don't want to be rude, so I'll say this bluntly. Your little sister is bullying my brother. I just want it to stop. Can you manage that?
Eric grinned. All you had to do was ask nicely, doll. You got it. June turned around and walked away. Nice to meet you, June, he shouted. Hope to see you around. Jeff nudged her.
You know him? I'm sure he wishes, she muttered. You alright? I am, but Kyler isn't. He was just trying to help. You can't solve all your problems by fighting. That is what I'm trying to teach him. I still think you should apologize. His heart was in the right place. His head was in the wrong place, though. I can't coddle him. I have to teach him.
Jeff shrugged.
I kind of wanted him to punch that guy.
June turned to him.
Don't say that. Keep it to yourself. Kind of like how I wanted him to punch that guy.
I smiled at each other and walked home. June tied her tennis shoe tightly. She let her leg off the bench and coughed. Noelle was sat next to her in the locker room. Because Miss Higgins was sick, the physical education teacher decided it would be a great day for a break. After watching a movie that was barely school appropriate, he decided to take everyone outside for some exercise. June didn't mind. She liked exercising. Besides, she could use a warm-up for the inevitable track and field tryouts she'd been attending. The boys and girls of their class had separate locker rooms, and it was almost time to go outside. Everyone wore generic white t-shirts, but the girls wore red shorts, while the boys wore powder blue. Noelle patted June on the back.
I'm sure you're excited, she said with a chuckle. You're like the only girl in here that's in shape.
June smiled at her.
You like you could have a nice jog and not be too winded? But I can't outrun a car in a school zone.
June laughed.
I'm just wondering if anyone knows what they're doing. Mr. Gable loves sports, so I'm guessing we're going to be playing a bunch of games.
Noelle shrugged.
I couldn't tell you, but I guarantee there's going to be some people not participating. Like our favorite grump.
June rolled her eyes.
I'll find a way to convince him to play nice.
There was a knock on the door, signaling it was time for the girls to come out. Because the teacher was a male, he obviously couldn't just barge in. The girls started towards the door, slowly flowing out towards the exit. Not exactly an orderly line, instead they were all congregated into a circle and slowly poured out like an hourglass. Once outside, they saw it was still somewhat a nice day out, no higher than 70 degrees with a few clouds in the sky. Fall was imminent. The boys were already outside, all talking to each other. Off to the side was Kyler, standing next to Ben, his arms crossed. June waved at them. Kyler glanced over and nodded in acknowledgement, then looked at Ben again, continuing their conversation. Kyler seemed more social lately. The last month had obviously done him favors. No one nudged her.
You can go talk to them. This isn't a concentration camp. Nah,
June waved her off.
I'm sure I'll see them during whatever game we have planned for us.
As if on cue, Mr. Gable stepped forward. Mr. Gable was as standard and stereotypical as a gym teacher could get. He had a bald head, a thin face, a large, bushy mustache. He wore a blue tracksuit with a matching ball cap and held a clipboard to his chest, his other arm behind his back. He spit out his gum and nodded at everyone confidently. Ladies and gents, I've decided to take your education into my own hands. Some kids glanced at each other and smiled, and as if to say, what a dork. Now, sitting down in school and taking notes is all well and good, but sometimes education goes beyond books. Sometimes it's about life lessons. And there is one thing you can learn life lessons from every single time you play it. He removed his other arm from behind his back to reveal a long wooden stick. Baseball. The wooden stick was actually a baseball bat. Some children exchanged glances nervously, while others cheered softly. June looked over at Kyler, who was looking at Mr. Gable with skepticism. All right, Mr. Gable continued. Now in the shed are a bunch of your old baseball mitts from past teams, from all different grades. Go find a glove that fits you, then meet me over by the diamond. If you're not there in 5 minutes, we'll have a problem. Capiche? Caposh. The kids resounded, as if conditioned to do so. The kids did as he asked, all going into the shed to fetch a glove. June found herself in line next to Kyler. She nudged him softly.
You must be excited,
she implied shyly.
You used to play, right?
Kyler shrugged. A little. She tilted her head, annoyed slightly.
Oh, come on. You're seriously going to try to tell me you're not even at least a little bit excited over this?
It's just baseball, Kyler said, a cynical smile across his lips.
Yeah, but you used to play.
Yeah, he said sarcastically. And you used to be a track lord. Does that make you super excited every time we do the pacer test?
I like the pacer test.
You would. June found a glove that fit her okay, but she wasn't very well versed in baseball. Sure, she was athletic, and she could probably play well enough with enough practice, but she didn't have time to do that. Kyler, on the other hand, was likely better. She figured he could hit and catch decent enough to get by, right? Kyler found one after searching, but it was the only one he tried on, as if he had been looking for that specific one. June eyed him suspiciously.
Is that your old glove?
Kyler looked down at it. Yeah, he admitted to June's surprise. If I'm going to be out there standing, I might as well feel familiar. June smiled.
Right.
They walked to the baseball diamond next to each other, being there before the curfew that Mr. Gable had given them. He took another spit, seemingly another piece of gum. We're going to do team captains, 'cause nothing builds character like picking your teammates. Screw that assignment crap. Our team captains are going to be Ben Crafting and Alex Ramirez. Ben smiled shyly while Alex started laughing with his buddies. This was obviously going to be a popularity contest. Whoever gets first pick plays defense first. We can play defense first, Ben offered. Alex shrugged. It was obvious he'd rather bat first. Okay, firstly, I pick Noelle. June looked at him strangely. She had no baseball experience. Why pick her first? Noelle breathed a sigh of relief, as if not wanting to be on Alex's team. Then a light bulb went off in June's head. Alex was Noelle's ex-boyfriend. No wonder he picked her first. Alex picked one of his friends, then the next pick went to Ben. June! June grinned. She was excited to try to play baseball. She'd tried it a few times, throwing a ball back and forth and batting just for fun, but never played it on a high level. Alex, again, picked one of his friends. To no one's surprise, Ben picked Kyler next. Kyler sighed, following Ben's orders, and walked over to his team. The rest of the students got divided up, and they went on a short huddle to figure out positions. Okay, Ben said, kneeling down. I can play catcher. Who wants to pitch? I can, a boy with short hair named Tyson said. Great. Let's figure out the field. Noel, you play first base. You're probably not that experienced, but if you can at least catch the ball with your foot on the base, you'll do fine. Noel laughed nervously.
I'll try.
The rest is a bit harder. We'll need an outfield. So, Finn and Jason, you guys take left and right field. June, I want you in center field. Center field has to have the fastest player on the team. That's you easily. June beamed with pride.
Well, I tried,
she said with a toothy grin. As for the infield, shortstop can't be anyone but Kyler. June glanced over at him, his expression uninterested.
Did you play shortstop?
Ben smiled. He did, and he was pretty good. Stop, Kyler said with a groan. Second and third base was given to Todd and Haley. They all separated and went out to the field to guard position. Everyone jogged except Kyler, who walked nonchalantly to his position. June patted her glove confidently as the first pitch from Tyson flew across the plate. It was low for a ball. The next pitch away was hit on the ground, but foul. The next pitch was swung on and slapped high into the air into center. June already got her chance, but it was far too easy for her to get to. Luckily, the sun wasn't in her eyes. She was able to find a way under it and catch it for the out. Noelle cheered as if she'd won the whole game. June threw the ball in and then realized her weakness. Her throw wasn't so great. She would have to heave it at full strength just to get it to second base. The next batter was up and a few pitches went by that weren't swung at. The fourth one was swung on and hit on the ground towards Kyler. June's eyes sparkled, ready to see Kyler in action. The ball approached, Kyler eyed it, and it rolled right past him, slightly into left field. June's arm shrunk. Jason ran up to the ball and threw it in quickly, making the runner retreat back to first. Ben sighed from behind the plate, while Alex's team laughed. What a freaking idiot! Kyler ignored them and looked off into the other direction. June groaned angrily.
Time out!
She screamed. She ran into the infield quickly and tapped Kyler on the shoulder.
Hey!
Kyler turned to her as she was a child leaving her room after bedtime for the third time. What do you want?
What the hell was that? You could have gotten that with your eyes closed.
I guess it slipped by me.
Don't BS me. You could have had that. You're supposed to be playing like the rest of us.
Who cares? He asked rudely. It's just a dumb game.
A dumb game you used to play.
Her anger turned into a sinister grin.
For every play you miss, I'll add a day to your time.
Kyler looked at her as if she had shot him. That's torture!
I agree. Now play ball, slugger.
June smiled sweetly at him, obviously sarcastic, and jogged back into center. Kyler turned away from her, back at home plate. The next batter came up, and Kyler's stance was still casual, but it seemed at least ready to grab a ball on the ground. The batter swung at the first pitch and hit it pathetically slow to third. Todd grabbed it, threw it to first, and the batter was out. June cheered at Noelle for the catch, and Noelle waved at her with a massive grin. There were 2 outs with a runner on second base. Thanks to the advance on the slow ground ball, the runner on second was Chance, a friend of Alex's. Chance grinned over at Kyler.
Nice played short, buddy.
Kyler glanced at him and turned away. The next batter came up, it being Alex. Chance led off second base, ready to run at the moment's notice. Kyler noticed his feet and seemed to do a quick math in his head. He gently stepped to his left, almost in between Chance and second base. He looked at Ben and showed the palm of his glove, opened, then closed it twice rapidly. Ben nodded and readied his glove. Tyson saw the sign and threw a fastball to the outside. Ben caught it and immediately heaved it towards second. Tyson ducked just in time, the ball almost grazing his hair. Chance cursed and dove back to second. But Kyler had quickly snagged the ball with his foot on the bag and swiped his glove across the hand of Chance, tagging him for the out. That's 3, Mr. Gable shouted. Switch! Chance dusted himself off and started back to the dugout. Kyler passed by behind him. Nice play at second, buddy, he heard him mutter. Chance looked back in anger and walked off all the same. June patted Kyler on the back.
That's much better.
Kyler rolled his eyes, ignoring the compliment. She high-fived Ben for the great throw as well. The first one to bat was Ben himself. Their pitcher was named Ashton. Ben smiled as if knowing he was in trouble.
Why does Ben look like he's boned?
Noelle said. That's Ashton Baker, Kyler explained, strapping his gloves on. He's the ace pitcher for the 9th years. He's been the ace for every team for the last 3 years. This year won't be any different.
He good?
He's the ace. He's the best. Kids who don't play baseball at a serious level won't get a hit off him. Ashton leaned in, getting the sign from his catcher, and pulled back into his stance. He kicked his leg and fired, a strike right down the middle. Kids in June's dugout whistled in awe. Ashton caught the ball, ready to pitch again. He threw another pitch, and this one curved down quickly. Ben swung over it, looking embarrassed. He laughed at himself, and Ashton smiled. He seemed to be enjoying himself, but it wasn't a condescending smile. He looked like he just enjoyed pitching. He pitched once again, a pitch that was above the strike zone, but curved into the top of it at the last second. "Strike 3, batter's out," Mr. Gable announced. Ben threw his head back in exasperation, not even swinging at the last pitch. He laid his bat down, ready for the next person. The next batter was June. She picked up the bat and lowered into an awkward stance. She wasn't used to the batting, so she was nervous. She waved to Ashton innocently, and he waved back. "At least he's nice about murdering us," she thought. The first pitch he threw was slow, and June swung right through it. She felt the strain of her arms for swinging so hard, but nonetheless lowered into her stance again. Ashton kicked his leg and fired another pitch. This one was a straight fastball. It was so fast, June didn't swing until the ball had already hit the mitt. Some of the kids on the defense laughed at her. June's cheeks grew hot, knowing that she looked ridiculous up there. She was ready for the next pitch. He dealt once again. This one, another fastball. June didn't even swing. "Strike 3, batter's out," Mr. Gable announced once again. June sighed, but smiled either way. She set her bat down. She wished she did better, but it was obvious that Ashton wouldn't be giving any mercy over the course of the game. The next batter was Noel. Their whole dugout cheered Noel, all except Kyler, although he did crack a smile when Noel went up there nervously. She picked up the bat and smiled through her red cheeks. "I'm not gonna swing, so just strike me out." Ashton smiled and nodded. He quickly threw three straight fastballs, and Noel went back to the dugout. They applauded her upon return. "You almost had him out there," Ben said with a grin. "You really wore him out," said June. Noel laughed and grabbed her glove, as did everyone else. The second inning went the same way. A few students on the other team strung together some hits and scored a run, but Eisen was able to adjust and get the outs he needed to minimize the scoring. Not a single ball was hit near Kyler, though, much to June's disappointment. To further her irritation, Kyler voted to bat ninth. There was no way Ashton would allow batters to get that far in the second inning. Ashton struck out the side once again on 9 pitches. Not a single ball was even touched, all of them looking or swinging strikes. The third inning started off with a few hits and a few outs. Once again, Alex was up to bat. There was a man on third with 2 outs. Alex stepped up to the plate. It was obvious he looked confident, and Tyson definitely looked like the nerves were setting in. He kicked and pitched, and it was low. Ball 1. A pitch later, same result. The pitch was low for ball 2. Tyson stepped off the mound and came back. He pitched again. This one was a strike. He nodded, ready for the ball. He kicked and dealt. The ball was hit on the ground to short, but it was way out of Kyler's reach. "Damn it," June thought. She started to run in as the ball was headed for center. Then, something amazing happened. As if hit with superhuman speed and agility, Kyler changed directions on a dime, sprinting full force over second base. He reached out his arm desperately. The ball fell into his mitt. June was starstruck. There was no way he should have been able to grab that. Alex looked shocked as well, almost stumbling on his way to first. On a second's notice, he jumped to a knee, using the strength of his arms, pulled the ball from his mitt with his right hand and threw it to first, easily the hardest thrown ball that wasn't pitched by Ashton all day. The ball hit the center of Noel's mitt, as it seemed to close itself from the force. Noel winced in pain, but held on, her foot on the bag. Alec touched the bag a hair later, but he was out. "That's 3, Mr. Gable said with a stutter, as if stunned by the play as well. "Change sides!" "Are you kidding me?" Alex screamed, throwing his batting gloves down. Kyler casually dusted himself off and looked at Ben. Ben pointed him in acknowledgement, almost not surprised by the incredible play. Kyler nodded back and walked to the dugout. When he got back, he strapped his batting gloves on, just as he did the past 2 innings of the off chance he got the bat. When everyone got back, they stared at him as if he had grown a pair of bat wings. He looked back at everyone, scanning the faces of his teammates. His expression showed obvious irritation. "What?" he said sharply. "Stop staring." "Idiots." They all looked away and went back to their conversation. June approached him, still staring. "Are you real?" she asked. Kyler lightly popped her on the forehead. Quit fooling around. It was a play. I just followed the rules you set out.
Seems like you remember a thing or two,
Ben said with a grin, putting his batting gloves on. It's like riding a bike. You just don't forget. The next batter was Tyson. Tyson swung his bat valiantly on all 3 pitches, getting the closest anyone's gotten to contact, but to no avail. The next batter, Haley, faced the same fate, except she only swung at 1 pitch. Everyone in the dugout was in exasperation at how good Ashton was, who only seemed to be getting better as the game went on.
"You're up,"
June said with a grin.
"Break a leg."
Kyler waved her off and picked up a bat. He got into a stance that looked just lazy. The rest of the teammates looked battle-ready. Kyler stood up straight, the bat leaned on his shoulder without effort, and his head was only slightly facing towards Ashton. Ashton shrugged it off and fired a pitch. Strike 1, easily. June slung her head down.
He could at least try.
A couple kids on the defense giggled. They didn't laugh when some of the others struck out, but they did seem to think it was funny. June was trying so hard. Kyler threw them a dirty look when that happened, but decided to ignore it. Second pitch was in for another strike, Kyler not even attempting to appear like he would swing. It was obvious he planned on just striking out. Alex and Chance, who played second and shortstop respectively, started giggling. Chance waved at Alex and imitated Kyler's stance with an exaggerated, goofy face. They laughed at each other, then at him. Kyler's eyes narrowed. Suddenly his stance changed. His bat raised over his shoulders, rotating in a slight roll, his right knee bent, his left leg straightened out behind him, his heel popping gently. The kids mocked him by faking a scared expression. Ashton didn't join in on the fun. He dealt the next pitch. Kyler raised his leg ready to swing, but he didn't. Ashton started walking back to the dugout. "Where are you going?" Mr. Gable asked. "That was a ball." Ashton looked at him as if he had spoken a foreign language. That was not a word he was used to. "You're sure?" "It was inside. Ball 1. It was the first pitch Ashton threw wasn't a strike. He looked exasperated, but he walked on to the mound either way. He shook himself off, ready for the next pitch. He kicked his leg and dealt the pitch. Kyler kicked his leg up, ready for the pitch. Then a sound resounded in the diamond that resembled a gunshot. The ball had been struck with immense force. Ashton's whole body turned in shock. The entire defense looked up as if an attack helicopter had threatened to bomb the area. The outfielders weren't even paying attention before Kyler hit the ball. Ben casually leaned out of the dugout to see where the ball would go, while June jumped out near home plate. She leaned to the right to see the ball flying down the left field line. The ball was well over the fence. Unfortunately, it was to the left of the foul pole. Kyler's face showed disappointment, then went back into his lazy stance once again. Ashton turned back towards home plate, his face showing a mixture of fear and awe. It was obvious no one had really crushed a ball that he'd pitched with that magnitude. The ball was hit over the fence with plenty to spare on it. If it were hit to dead center with the same distance, it would have been a home run. Ashton wiped his brow and threw another pitch right down the middle. Kyler didn't swing. "Strike 3, batter's out," Mr. Cable announced. Kyler put down the bat and walked to the dugout. June followed him back, her head whipping between him and the foul pole.
"Hey!" she cried. "What's your deal?"
"What?" he asked, playing dumb.
"You destroyed that ball. You could have hit it just as hard as you tried again."
"Might have gone foul again, too. Didn't want to waste the energy."
"That's your excuse?"
"You only gave me a few seconds to think of one. What could you possibly want? A written essay?"
"I wanted you to try."
"I did. For 1 pitch. Be happy." June covered her face.
"You are less reasonable than a brick wall. At least a brick wall wouldn't intentionally piss me off."
The rest of the game went like that. Kyler would try to make plays on defense, but when it came to batting, he didn't swing at another pitch. They lost the game 4-0. Ashton threw a perfect game, which would have been impressive if you were playing against an actual team. After everyone put their supplies away, June pulled Kyler aside after the game. "What do you want now?" Kyler asked.
"You want to know what I think?"
Kyler blinked. "What?"
"I think you really want to play baseball again."
Kyler scoffed. "Where did you get that idea?"
"I saw the way you looked up there right before that pitch. Right after that dive. You were having fun."
"You must have the sun in your eye."
"It was facing the other direction."
Kyler shrugged. "Even if that were true, I couldn't play again. Not cut out for it.
And how would you know that? Did you travel to the future to check the rosters, McFly?
That reference is outdated as hell.
Anytime something offers an inkling or a chance of rejection, you immediately back down. Doesn't life get tiring only thinking of certainties?
Kyler couldn't respond, and June knew she had him beat. Despite her trying so hard to make him a happier person, it was him always setting her straight. It felt good to be in the right. Again, even if that were true, I'd need to train all over again. I'm almost certain I hit that pitch as hard as I did because Ashton wasn't expecting me to swing, so he threw me a meatball.
You won't know that until you try.
Kyler looked into the distance after a deep sigh. He shook his head and closed his eyes. He took a deep breath and exhaled. He looked at her, his emerald eyes locked onto hers. I'll think about it. June's face lit up.
Promise?
I'll think about thinking about it.
Screw you.
June opened the door to her room and left into the living room. She couldn't even keep her eyes open. She wore sweatpants and a baggy t-shirt as she dragged her feet into the kitchen. She pulled a bowl from the cabinet and set it on the counter. She nabbed a spoon from a drawer and dropped it into the bowl. June then traced the fronts of the cereal boxes in the cabinet. She jumped for one and grabbed it. Because of her small stature, she'd gotten used to jumping for things. She poured her cereal, then put the box back. She grabbed the milk from the fridge, pouring it into her bowl. She then put the milk back and walked into the living room. Still half asleep, she slumped down onto the couch and watched an early morning cartoon. She had a little bit before school started, so she decided to try to relax. She started spooning the cereal into her mouth, trying to get some nutrition before the day. The crunching of her cereal made her relax in the morning. Crunch, crunch, crunch. She loved the sound of it. She spooned another bite into her mouth. Crunch, crunch, crunch. She eyed the TV. It was some silly cartoon that Jeff was on the floor watching, already dressed for school. She smiled at him, thinking back to how simple life was when she was his age. She grabbed another spoonful. Crunch, crunch, crunch. That was strange. She hadn't put anything in her mouth yet. She looked to her right and jumped, almost spilling her cereal. It was Kyler. He was sitting next to her on the couch, a bowl of cereal in his hand. He glanced over at her. "Morning," he muttered with a full mouth.
What the hell are you doing? That's my cereal. Get your own.
Huh? He said, offended. It's not very Juniper of you, Juniper. She shook her head and continued watching TV.
I'll bill you.
For a bowl of cereal?
For a bowl of my cereal.
I didn't realize you coveted your Cinnamon Toast Crunch so vigorously. June moaned.
I'm too tired for this.
Kyler shrugged, continuing to shovel spoonfuls of cereal into his mouth. After breakfast, June quickly got dressed and walked next to Kyler to school. They talked seldom, their conversations usually just small talk while on the way to school. They arrived in their class and took their seats. June and Noelle talked for a bit every day, sometimes about Noelle's romantic adventures. June hated those stories, as she considered a little raunchy, but it was Noelle, so she tolerated it. Noelle would even try to involve Kyler, but it was obvious he had little interest in conversing with them without a topic that specifically required his attention. Miss Higgins tapped her desk, getting the attention of the students. June pulled her notebook onto her desk, then a mechanical pencil from her bag, ready for notes. Kyler pulled his notebook out as well, obviously to go along with June's rules. He rustled around in his bag, then looked at June. Give me a pencil.
I think you meant, can I borrow a pencil?
No. June rolled her eyes. She pulled a yellow number 2 pencil from her bag and handed it to Kyler. He took it, ready to take notes.
Okay, we're going to go over Grapes of Wrath today, a new story for you guys. It's a favorite of mine, so I hope you enjoyed, considering it's our next lesson plan. We'll have a quiz after every bit of the book and a test at the end. It's not open note like our last one.
A few kids groaned. June nudged Kyler.
Looks like you're boned.
Kyler threw her a mocking laugh at her.
Before we get to all that, though, we have a new student today. Just moved here a few weeks ago.
A boy walked into class, his hands into pockets. Some girls started whispering to each other. June looked up and dropped her pencil.
Everyone, this is Eric Mooney. Please make him feel welcome.
Eric smiled to the class, then saw June, and his eyes lit up. June looked over at Kyler and could have absolutely sworn his entire body was on fire from the rage. His eyes spelled pure murder. Eric glanced at Kyler and smirked, obviously dismissive of him. There was only one open seat in the room, and it was right next to June. Eric grinned, almost as though that's what he wanted. He sat down and threw a warm smile towards June. June smiled awkwardly at him and then glanced at Kyler. His thumb snapped through the number 2 pencil, breaking it in half as if it were balsa wood. 2 things were on her mind. Firstly, Kyler and Eric would likely kill each other by the end of the day, unless June had a master plan to keep them separated. Secondly, that was her last number 2 pencil.